Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Steve Johnson, and I'm going to welcome you today to our webinar, which is entitled A Comprehensive Introduction to Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, or REBT. I happen to be the director and professor of psychology at Columbia International University and the clinical learning and development manager for the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, or SCAD, located in Connecticut. And so today I want to focus on the basics of REBT, and I hope it gives you a solid foundation for, and see whether you're interested, and then you can move into looking at it in more detail if you would like. I do have a YouTube channel entitled Psychotherapy Education and Training, and you will find all kinds of videos on all aspects of psychotherapy, including second wave models such as REBT and CBT, and even third wave models such as DBT and ACT. So let's just jump into today's topic. And this is what I want to focus on today. One, very briefly, the basic insight that gave rise to the whole second wave behavioral models, including REBT, which was the original one that I'm going to be focusing on today. I want to look at the ABC model, which is basic to this model, how to go about setting up psychotherapy goals collaboratively with clients, and then give you a taste of the three types of interventions used within this model: cognitive, emotive, and behavioral. There are many, many different interventions, and I won't have time to go into all of those, but I will give you an example of each of these. And then I want to look at something that has become of big interest to some of us within REBT, and that is, how can we address meaning of life within this model? Because we have a good number of our clients who come in, particularly with depression, but also other disorders that are really looking at problems of meaning in life. So let's get into it. The basic insight was really from Epictetus, one of the early Greek Stoic philosophers, and Dr. Albert Ellis, who was the founder of REBT for many, many years, was reading Greek philosophy and Epictetus in his Enchiridion, and came across this line that we are disturbed not by events, but by the thinking that we have about those events. So that was rather radical, kind of new seismic shift within the psychotherapy models when that shift moved away from looking at primarily events and situations as the major causes of our emotions, behaviors, and even our physiological responses, to the meaning that we give to those events. So let's begin to look at that in more detail. If we look at the ABC model, and this is basic to all of our REBT, the A will stand for an activating event or something that happens. And within the model, we tend to, when we're interacting with the client, ask for an event that happened rather recently that might be bringing them in, or their emotional response to come in, right? Another word for the activating event, which I really like because it's kind of descriptive, is an adversity, because clients don't come in when generally and go, oh, wow, my life is fantastic, filled with wonderful events. They're usually coming in because something has happened, or there's been a history of multiple events, negative events, and then there's this one that just kind of was the precipitating factor for them to come in. So A is the activating event or the adversity. B stands for beliefs and inferences. And the beliefs are the what are triggered by these activating events or the adversity. And those give rise to the C, which stands for consequences. And the consequences that we're going to focus on today are largely the emotions and behaviors, but there are also physiological responses to the beliefs that we hold about particular events or situations or states of affairs. So let's dig into this even more. The activating event is a recent event. And so when a client comes in and they say they've experienced something, we may say, can you give me an example of a recent event that may have happened that precipitated the kind of consequences that you're currently experiencing? When we do that, we ask for a specific event, and we do that for a primary reason, because if we get a specific event from the client, we can more easily identify the associated emotions and cognitions or beliefs that the client, is having about that event or that situation. So we want the recent event, the activating event or the adversity, and the specifics of that. The beliefs within REBT that we talk about are two types. Really, the title should be cognitions rather than beliefs. And then there are two types of cognitions. The two types of cognitions are inferences and beliefs. An inference is when someone, maybe our client or maybe ourselves, are making an attribution of meaning to the situation or event, or the meaning that we give to this situation or event. And the belief is not about giving meaning to it, but evaluating the meaning that we gave to it. So it is an evaluative one. And we say in REBT that the inference actually sets the stage, perhaps for the disturbance that the client is experiencing, but the belief kind of clinches the deal. And we'll look at that in some detail a bit later. So beliefs or cognitions, there are two types: inferences that are attributions of meaning to situations, and beliefs which are evaluative attributions. Now let's go to these beliefs. What we find is that an individual may give meaning to a situation, that's the inference, but we find that the inference is not really what gives rise to the emotions and behaviors, so much as it is the beliefs. Because someone could have people could have different beliefs about the same situation. Example, let's say I got fired from a job, and one of my thoughts might be, oh, I don't care. Another one might be, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This will be the end of my life. I'm not going to be able to pay my bills, all of those kinds of things. Or another one might say, oh, this shows what a failure I am. Or the company that I worked for, my boss they were just big jerks. So you see, the different beliefs may cause the different emotions that an individual might have. So the beliefs are what we really investigate deeply. We do look at the inference because we want to know what meaning the client ascribes to a situation. Now, within REBT, and this would be a little bit different than CBT, the dysfunctional beliefs identified by those two models, both of which are second wave behavioral models, are somewhat different, but the point is that these beliefs, whether you're looking at CBT or REBT, give rise to our emotions and behaviors. So we're looking at REBT, and the beliefs here that give rise to dysfunctional emotions are demandingness. And in English, we know that that we're having a demanding thought. We don't have to vocalize this, but if we have a demanding thought within our mind, in English, typically those sentences contain words like should, ought, must, have to, or need. Or should not or must not, those kinds of things. Because we could have a negative demand as much as we could have a more positive demand. The second dysfunctional emotion is awfulizing. This is where we believe that something is as bad as it possibly could be. The event or the situation is 100% bad, right? Almost catastrophic. In fact, in CBT, they call it catastrophizing or catastrophizing kind of thinking. So the third dysfunctional one would be frustration and tolerance. And we often see awfulizing going hand in hand with frustration and tolerance. One writer wrote a book, SOS Help for Emotions, Lynn Clark. And in his book, he called frustration and tolerance, I can't stand it itis. This is when we believe that this is too much, this is overwhelming, I can't stand this, those kinds of beliefs. And most of us have those kinds of thoughts at times. In fact, Albert Ellis said, 99% of humanity experiences frustration and tolerance. And then another person said, and the other 1% are just not telling the truth. So frustration and tolerance, for example, is very, very common when one is experiencing anxiety. And then the last or the fourth kind of dysfunctional belief is global negative rating. Global negative rating of what? The self. You could globally rate yourself as a loser or hopeless or beyond redemption, whatever, right? Or other people, we can globally and negatively rate them, or life, or the world. And so we might say my life is horrible, it's no good, those kinds of things, right? Or the world is nothing but a vale of tears, there's no justice in the world, it's only painful, etc. So global negative rating. So demandingness, awfulizing, frustration, intolerance, and global negative rating. Now, about even one particular event or situation, someone may have a combination of these beliefs. So, for example, let's say I have a demand that you must love me, right? And then I could also have awfulizing. You must love me, and if you don't, that would be awful. Or maybe they don't have awfulizing, but they go, you must love me, which is the demand. And if you don't, I just couldn't stand it. So that would be demandingness plus frustration and tolerance. Or you must love me in the way that I want to be loved. And if you don't, that must mean I'm an utter loser. Or that would be global negative rating of self. Or they might believe you must love me in the way that I want to be loved. And if you don't, you're just no good. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Okay. So notice we can have a combination of these beliefs. And when we're working with a client and they come in with a particular event or situation, namely their activating event or their adversity, and we're gathering their beliefs, we want to check out for the presence of all of these, okay? And in another video, I can even show you great details about how we go into that process of checking it. But for now, know that we want to check to see about the presence of these dysfunctional beliefs. Now, what makes a belief dysfunctional, and why do we call these dysfunctional beliefs? A dysfunctional belief is one that when an individual embraces that dysfunctional belief, it impairs or inhibits the attainment of your desired life goals. So if you have a goal and you're being really demanding and putting a lot of pressure on yourself, that may actually get in the way. Or if you're starting to awfulize, you so focus on that you're not giving the correct attention that would maximize your performance so that you better attain your desired life goals. So that's what we mean by dysfunctional. And by the way, when we say dysfunctional, that is not a negative evaluation of the client and in any way. We never would say anything like that about the client herself or himself. We're just talking about their beliefs. And we always say that we'll be focusing on your thoughts And if at any time that feels like I'm talking about you, just let us know, because believe me, that is not our intention to do that. What do we want in place of those dysfunctional beliefs? We want more functional beliefs. So instead of demanding us, instead of the shoulds and the oughts and the musts and the haves, we would like to have preferential beliefs. Beliefs such as I wish, I hope, I want, I desire. Preferences are fine, because think about it. If you're really demanding about something and it doesn't come about, you will have often set the stage for some kind of emotional disturbance. Whereas if it's a preference and it doesn't happen, right? If it's a wish or a want or a hope or a desire, then you may not be happy if it doesn't occur, but you won't be devastated. You may be disappointed. Okay. The other one would be the corollary, the functional corollary of awfulizing. And instead of awfulizing, what we want to help the client embrace is accept the badness of the situation without exaggerating that badness. Don't recognize that it's not good, that it's not bad. You wish it wasn't happening or whatever, but don't think it's the end of the world, that you'll be utterly dysfunctional. Don't raise it up to the level of the Holocaust. Okay. The next one would be the functional alternative to frustration intolerance. Remember, frustration intolerance is the I can't stand it-itis, this is overwhelming, this is too much. And again, what we're hoping here is to help that client accept the badness of the situation, but also to realize that they actually have resources and attributes within themselves to handle that it will not devastate them. Okay, it may not feel good, and you certainly would wish that it wasn't occurring, but you will get through this. And then for the global negative rating of self, others, life, and world, what we want to put in that place is unconditional acceptance of all of those things. Now, sometimes individuals get confused. They think that when we say we want someone to unconditionally accept themselves, that means we have to like everything about ourselves. And we're not saying that at all. We're saying unconditionally accept yourself, acknowledge that you have some challenging behaviors and thoughts and inclinations whatsoever, but don't globally put yourself down. Why? Again, remember, a belief is dysfunctional if it gets in the way of you attaining your desired life goals. And if you globally rate yourself and you see yourself as a failure, that's going to get in the way of you putting in the energy to actually attain your desired life goals. But if you unconditionally accept yourself, realize that you may have some failings here and there, and maybe some skills that need to be developed or whatsoever. But if you accept yourself, you will be more resilient and better able to attain those desired life goals. No guarantee, but you increase the possibility of the attainment of those goals. Okay. I do want to say that if you have any questions as I'm talking, please feel free to make comments. I will see the comments and I will get to them as I can, as I am able, because I do want to help clarify anything that may be unclear or confusing. Now, what if we look at the C? Here are the consequences. And I'm just going to name a few. These are not all the emotions. These are the dysfunctional emotions. When I say dysfunctional emotions, I am not saying that if you have these, you've got a mental or emotional disorder. I'm not saying that you're not normal. It is very, very, very normal to have these emotions. It's normal for people to get depressed, anxious, enraged, feeling guilty and shame and envy and jealousy and all of these emotions. They're normal, but typically these tend to get in the way of our attainment of desired life goals. If you think about it, especially if you're really depressed, sometimes you don't have, cognitions may slow down. It's hard to think through problems as you would be able to if you weren't so depressed. Same thing with anxiety and enrage. These emotions can be painful or so dysfunctional to the point that they just get in the way of you attaining life goals, or even they can be disruptive of relationships with other people, or even your own relationship with yourself. So these are some of the dysfunctional emotions, and I want to dig into these. I will not be able to cover all of these emotions, but I'm hoping that, for example, if you look at my YouTube channel, I do go into every one of these dysfunctional emotions and help you conceptualize those and take steps to help people or even yourself when you're experiencing these dysfunctional emotions. Now, notice we can call these emotions by a lot of different names, and we do. It's not the name or the title of the emotion that matters. It is whether that emotion is impeding your attainment of desired life goals. If, let's say, someone says they're depressed, but that emotion is not really impeding their attainment of desired life goals, in our mind as REBT therapists, we may go, okay, that's not consistent with our definition of depression. And that emotion is probably not dysfunctional that they're experiencing. A lot of people will say that they are really anxious when, from an REBT perspective, they're more concerned about something. And we're like, concern may not feel good, but you can be concerned and better attain life goals than if you're really, really anxious. So it's not the word. So if you're a therapist or you're a graduate student learning psychotherapy or even an undergrad, just remember that it's not the label of the emotion. It is the functionality or dysfunctionality of that emotion or that label that is what we're talking about. Okay. So let me give an example of this. Now, for each of the dysfunctional emotions, right? Some that I just named, and then there are, of course, others. Each of these emotions, dysfunctional emotions, are grounded in specific inferences. And now remember, an inference is the meaning that the client gives to a situation or event. So every emotion has a specific inference and beliefs that the client has. So they have specific inference, specific beliefs, and they exhibit specific behaviors for each. So the inference for depression and the beliefs and the behaviors associated with depression are going to be different than the inference associated with anxiety, for example, or the beliefs that are associated with anxiety, or the specific behavior that's associated with anxiety. But let's look at the depression right now. The inference or the meaning that the individual gives to an event or a situation is that the individual has experienced a major loss, a loss that is significant to them. It can be any kind of loss, so long as the individual sees and experiences it as very significant to them and impacting their lives in a negative way. So that could be the loss of the life of someone that you dearly love. It could be the loss of health. You get bad news that you've been diagnosed with cancer, and so you may have depression because you see that as a major loss, and it is a bit major loss for you, or loss of a job, loss of meaning in life, loss of a friend, any kind of loss. I have people that their pet dies or is really sick, and they get depressed. Very, very normal. Of course, the depression may not help the individual, but it is so normal for these losses for us to get depressed. But we want to help people who do get depressed to move to a place where they can function better in their life. And that may take a little bit of time, but we can help them by checking the kinds of thoughts that they may be having and helping them to adjust those in ways and behaviors, adjust those in ways that better help them navigate in life. So the beliefs that they might have, and here there can be different combinations of beliefs that contribute to depression, but there always will be a demand. And the demand typically is this loss should not have occurred. It's not uncommon for someone you love to die and you go, they shouldn't have died. And sometimes we even get angry. We blame the hospital, whatever, and maybe the hospital is at fault, but we think that this should not have occurred. Maybe we blame ourselves. This loss should not have occurred. If I had been there, if I had helped more, if I had known what they were really going through, so these would be typical kind of losses that individuals have about which they would make themselves depressed. They may be awfulized. They may say, it's awful that I've experienced this loss, that I lost this loved one, or I lost this job, or I've lost the health that I had before because of the things that it was able to let me do. Or frustration and intolerance about that loss. I can't stand this loss. This is too much. This is overwhelming. I remember when I was diagnosed with cancer, initially I went, okay, this is too much. I can't deal with this. Eventually I got around to, more functional thinking. And when that happened, I could better reason through what I needed to do in terms of treatment and that kind of thing. But initially, I was not at my best, and so it's quite normal for people to go through that, but it's not helpful. And so we want to help them move to a place where they can better deal with the negative situation with which they've been handed. Or there can be global negative rating about the loss. My life isn't meaningful now without that individual. They shouldn't have left me. This is horrible. They shouldn't have done that. We even get angry in addition to depressed. Or, I'm at fault. I'm no good. I'm a loser. All of those. Now, so we have the inference. And the inference is that I've experienced a significant loss, one that's really important to me. I have beliefs about that loss. These are normal, but unhelpful generally. And then we have behaviors that are associated with depression. Sometimes it's avoidance. What do we avoid in depression? Sometimes we don't use the word avoidance, we say withdrawal. It's very common for when we are experiencing depression to withdraw from those activities and people that were positive for us, that we enjoyed. And even isolation is so common with depression. So they may even avoid friends. For example, one thing I love to do is to go to movies, get a big tub of popcorn and, that gigantic diet soda or whatever. But if I'm depressed, I won't do that. I'll think, it's not going to help. And so I just isolate rather than doing the things that are enjoyable, which makes it even worse, So we withdraw, we avoid, or we tend to spend a lot of time, an inordinate amount of time, just focusing on that loss. All of these are normal. They just may not be helpful. And we as therapists or as individuals can help move beyond that. Let's look at anxiety, another one. Here, the inference that the individual makes, is that in my environment, there is a threat. Anxiety is grounded in seeing or viewing or attributing a threat in the environment. So, for example, during COVID, many people saw COVID as a threat, and it was a potential threat to health. So there was a threat there. Or maybe someone gets anxious about an exam that's coming up, and that because they think that failing on that exam could be a really big threat to them attaining the degree or the grade that they want, etc. So there's an attribution of threat. And often, anxiety is because we attribute overwhelming threat to the something in the environment, and it is made worse if we don't have the belief that we can handle that. Okay, so there can be a demand that threat should not occur or it must not occur. It would be awful if it did. I wouldn't be able to stand it. It would be too much. And my life would be very complicated or, unenjoyable, etc., if the threat became a reality. And then the behavior associated with the attribution of that threat and holding these beliefs would be avoidance. Think about it. When you are anxious, you tend to avoid the things about which you are anxious. Again, anxiety is a normal condition, generally not helpful, and often gets in the way. I'm a professor, so if I have students who get highly anxious, they may come into my office and we talk about it, and they come to realize that, this anxiety is actually making it very, very difficult for them to study. So if they begin to see, instead of overwhelming threat, that, there may be a threat, potential threat, but they could manage it. There are things that they can do to manage that and see the resources. But when you see things as an overwhelming threat, you kind of forget the resources that you have because you're so focused on the threat being overwhelming or evaluating it as such. Okay. I want to just do one more emotion, and that is rage. Some say anger, but I would say that sometimes what people call anger is not dysfunctional, but rage almost always is dysfunctional. The inference in anger, the meaning that an individual gives to a situation or even an institution, is that other person or that institution has somehow treated me unjustly, or they violated some rule, some ethical principle, some moral principle that I really value, right? And sometimes we're angry with the self, and so we go, I'm the one that acted unjustly. I'm the one that violated my ethical principle, right? But I want to focus on when we're angry or enraged with another person. The beliefs there are demanding this. They should not have done that to me. I did not deserve that. Or awfulize, it's horrible what they did to me, right? Or I can't stand that kind of behavior. Or they are no good. They're not my friend anymore. All of that global negative rating of them. We forget other factors about them that may be quite good when we are enraged. And then the behavior associated with being enraged would be, verbal or physical attack, or maybe some kind of passive aggressive behavior or avoidance. Sometimes we're just so angry, we slam the door and we leave and say, I'm not talking to them. Or we think, I'm not talking to them, I'm not communicating with them. Those would be typical behaviors of being enraged. Now, let me just say one thing about this. Sometimes an individual who repeatedly throughout their life is enraged. Sometimes we would say that person has an anger problem, right? They often are enraged because they tend to focus on the wrong thing. And in therapy or in counseling, they may want to focus on the wrong thing. Instead of looking at whether being enraged is getting in the way of their attainment of their life goals, including their relationships with other people or relationships with other people on the job, or with people at their educational institution or whatever, they focus on being justified in their anger. Well, maybe they are justified. Maybe some ethical principle that is really important to them has been violated. Okay. But by focusing on being justified gets in the way of them moving away from being enraged and disrupting the relationships in their life. And so one of the ways that we help these individuals is join with them on their value. Maybe they want justice. Maybe they want fairness. Maybe they want good ethical behavior. That's good. All of us would want that, right? So we join with them on that, but we try to help them see that the demandingness and the awfulizing and all the beliefs they have about the unjust or immoral or unethical behavior, it's really getting in the way of them, changing situations, or even, when they get enraged and they act even out of that rage, people don't want to be around them sometimes. And sometimes that behavior is what they focus on, and they cannot even acknowledge the unjust behavior that they had, about which this person is enraged. So but it's easier if we join with them on the value and go, yeah, I love your values. The value is really great, but I'm curious about whether what the way you act when you are enraged gets in the way or prevents you from getting more fairness in the world. So sometimes we can help them get buy-in on doing this. Also, if we tend to get angry quite a bit, and we all do at times, right? That's just what we call a human. Now, remember, there are dysfunctional emotions, and there are also adaptive emotions. Now, this is an ideal vocabulary of emotions that REBT has. Do clients have to use this? Absolutely not. A client will use whatever they do. The only good thing about having a common vocabulary shared by the client and the therapist or counselor is that they may be on the same page. But no matter what name they give to the emotion, you as therapists need to check whether it's functional or dysfunctional. Remember, the way we check whether it's functional or dysfunctional is when they experience that emotion, whatever the label. Does that tend to help them, or does that tend to get in the way? Okay. So here we have dysfunctional, and then corollary, more adaptive or functional emotions. So anxiety is the label that we give for the dysfunctional one when someone makes an attribution of threat in the environment. The functional emotion, concern, actually they have the same inference that there's a threat in the environment, but their beliefs about that threat are different. They're not the demandingness and the awfulizing and the frustration and tolerance, etc. They're more adaptive ones, as we already looked: preferential language, accepting the badness without exaggeration, all of that. Then that emotion would be called concern. The client may not use that. Client may say that they're highly anxious, but when we talk to them, then they're not anxious within this definition within REBT. And so we go, okay, that right now it doesn't seem to be getting in their way. We may want to check whether in other situations it does seem to be dysfunctional, but maybe in this one it's not so dysfunctional. Or the client may not, we may be early in the therapy, we haven't developed trust yet, and that kind of thing. And as therapy goes along, they may be better able to disclose to us exactly what emotions they're experiencing. But whatever it is, don't react to the word for the emotion. Just notice assess whether it is functional or dysfunctional. That's your responsibility as the therapist. It's not the client's responsibility to use the language. And so we don't lecture them and saying, oh, what you're experiencing is really concern rather than anxiety. We'll use their label, and then if it is, whatever it is. Or they may go the other way. They may say, I'm just annoyed, but when really they're enraged. Notice the corollary functional or adaptive emotion to rage is what we call annoyance, or some might call righteous indignation, right? Now, someone say, I'm annoyed, but when we listen to it, what they call annoyance is really getting in the way of their life, and so they're more angry, right, than annoyed. They're more enraged than annoyed. All of these emotions are normal. What does that mean? Statistically, these are common emotions for people. They're normal in that sense, but some are helpful and some are not helpful generally, and so we need to assess for that. Okay. Now, let's move. That gives you a taste for some of the emotions. If you go to my YouTube channel, Psychotherapy Education and Training, you will find I have a whole, maybe even several videos on what's called the conceptualization of emotion. And I will go through all of those other emotions, which maybe you might experience as pretty helpful if you want to begin to incorporate some of this into the therapy that you do or even in your own life. So, but let's look at setting therapy goals. So the client has come in, they've given us the activating event. We know what the emotions are. We may know what the behaviors are that they're engaging in. And then it's time for us to set goals. Well, there's certain things that we want to do in setting goals. There's research called common factors research. And common factors research shows that there are certain factors that if we exhibit those certain factors, that the therapy tends to go much better. Well, one of those factors, those common factors that help therapy go well, is that the goal setting within the therapy is collaborative. The therapist doesn't say these are the goals, and the client doesn't dictate necessarily, but they work together to do that, because this client is an expert on how they feel, maybe on how they think. The therapist has expertise in helping an individual make those changes, but they may not know how it feels for the client. And so collaborating together may help maximize better outcomes. Okay. So, what kind of goals do we want? We want very concrete goals, very measurable goals. So, we work with the client to get a goal so that I would be able to determine by their behavior, by their emotions, by what they say, that that we've reached that goal or not. Okay. If I can't assess whether the goal has been reached, and if the client can assess that, and it's really kind of boohoo and nebulous, then it's not real helpful. So the more concrete we get the goal, the better. I was in a group, and I was talking about I was having a little trouble with my diabetes, and they said, "Well, what's your goal?" And I said, "Okay, I want my blood glucose to be on an average this." And so that was a very concrete goal. Some goals can't be quite that concrete, but we will try to get as concrete a goal as possible. Also, the goal needs to be attainable. If it is impossible for the individual to attain it, that goal is no good. And so you need to make sure that the goal is attainable, that the client can do it. It may not be fully attainable all at once, but it has to be attainable in the end, right? We may work toward that goal. It also needs to be measurable. If we can't measure whether we're moving in that direction or not, then again, we're hampered in knowing whether that. And so we could be biased. Research shows that many times therapists think that we're reaching the therapy goal when the client doesn't really think that. So we need to have it measurable so that we'll be able to agree on whether the goal is being attained or not. It also needs to be relevant. If you have a goal that's not even relevant to what brought the person into therapy, who's going to be motivated to do that? The client certainly won't be motivated. And then it needs to be an approach goal, or preferably an approach goal over an avoidance goal. Now, those may be new terms to you. An approach goal is one that we're trying to move toward. An avoidant goal is we're trying to avoid something. It is better to have an approach goal than an avoidant goal. Why? If we're trying to avoid something, we have to think of all the possible ways we have to avoid that thing. And so that can be complicated. And some people who have a lot of avoidant goals tend to be prone toward anxiety and depression. It makes perfect sense. If you're trying to avoid a bunch of stuff, you have to avoid all kinds of things in your environment. So you may need to make an environment really, really small and not enjoy life. And so it doesn't really help often, right? Whereas you have an approach goal, all you have to do is find one way to attain it and then strive to try to do that. So it's better to have an approach goal than an avoidant goal, something that they're moving toward rather than something they're trying to avoid, right? So if we want these attributes in the therapy goal that we're trying to create. Now, there are other things. There are sometimes, let's say someone has anxiety, and I go, what would you like to experience other than anxiety? We're trying to work out a goal here. And they go, I don't want to feel anything. Well, that's not a viable goal. That's an avoidant goal. And it's not really helpful. If the best way not to feel anything is, not to be alive, well, that's not a viable goal, right? How can, as a live person, can you move in the direction of maybe experiencing concern rather than anxiety? Now, concern may not feel good, but with concern, we may be better able to get things done, whereas with anxiety, that may get in the way. And so they would say, they might say, I want to be happy. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that may not be realistic. You've got a really negative event that you're experiencing and you think you should be happy. Let me give an example of why a positive emotion, such as happiness, may be highly dysfunctional. Let's say I have a child and that child's temperature is 103 degrees or 104, very high Fahrenheit. That's very, very high. It's a fever, right? And we want to get that down. If I'm highly anxious, then I'm going to, I may not do the things that will actually help lower that fever. But if I'm happy, think about it. That is really, really dysfunctional to be happy because a child has a high fever. So we don't want a positive emotion in there. We might want a negative emotion, but a functional negative emotion, right? Like concern. You can be concerned and focused to do things to get that fever down, which would be really, really helpful. So we're not saying you need a positive emotion. In fact, some positive emotions would be really, really, really dysfunctional. So we want something that will help the attain a desired life goal, where in this case, the desire would be to lower that child's fever, right? Temperature. Okay, so these are the kinds of features that we want in the goals that we collaboratively establish with our clients. Now I want to go into interventions. And so in Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, we have three types of interventions: cognitive interventions, behavioral interventions, and emotive interventions. I want to give you one example for each of these. There are many examples of each of these. And again, read a good textbook on REBT. Again, I hate to keep promoting my own YouTube channel, but I do cover these different types of interventions in some detail with examples. And sometimes I even do actual cases, cover, hypothetical cases where we discuss the use of these different kinds of interventions. So 3 types: cognitive interventions, behavioral interventions, and emotive interventions. So let's look at this. One example of an emotive intervention is rational emotive imagery. Okay. And so rational emotive imagery is very easy to do. We have the client sit down with us, and I will take their let me put it in a slightly different way here. I'm so sorry about that. In the imagery, we divide the imagery into 2 parts. First, the client envisions, through their imagination, they envision a situation in which they typically have a dysfunctional response. So, for example, if they have anxiety, they would view the situation about which they typically make themselves anxious. They would get in touch with that, visualize it in great detail, and we tell them, try to get yourself to experience the anxiety that you would have in that situation. As soon as you are, in touch with that emotion, you're experiencing that emotion of anxiety, just tell me you're there, and then we will stop. We calm down, we let the client kind of calm down for a while, and then we say, part two of the imagery is envision the very same situation. Don't change the situation. Envision the same situation. But this time, what I want you to try to do is make yourself feel concerned, but not anxious. Concerned, but not anxious. No, so notice, we've already talked to the client about differences between anxiety and concern. We've already done that. Now we're moving to an emotive intervention, okay? And then they do that. And so I say, let me know when you're feeling concern rather than anxiety. When they do that, then we stop and then we discuss this. What changes did you make in your thinking that helped you to experience concern rather than anxiety? Because whatever that is, we would want to discuss that and see, how they can do that more frequently and more quickly to get a shift away from the anxiety. And then they practice, and it's a really fun one to do in the session itself, right? And it's easy for the client to do. Sometimes we say, when you're home, go do this. If you do it, then give yourself a reward. Like my reward would maybe be to have a cup of Italian coffee. And if you don't do it, then do something you normally don't like to do, like clean toilets or something, okay? Something you don't generally like to do. For me, it might be change the litter box of the cat. I don't like doing that, okay? But if I don't do this. So do it every day at a particular time as best you can and reward yourself when you do that, because then you'll develop the skills for how to shift the anxiety to concern, and you'll be more functional with that. Let's look at a behavioral intervention. One of these is William James actually talked about this way back in the 1800s, and Wittgenstein talked about it in the 20th century. It's acting as if. And sometimes we have the client act as if. Let's say they have anxiety. And so here, I even give an example in this slide. Client gets anxious about the possibility of getting fired from the job. So what we have them do is act as if you're not experiencing the anxiety. Well, we sit down, we brainstorm with the client about what they might do if they weren't anxious about getting fired, and what would they do then that they're not doing when they get really anxious. So maybe the behavior would be different if they weren't anxious, right? So we brainstorm about that. And then we support the client in acting in just that way after considering with the client how appropriate it is to act in such a way. Because if it's not going to be appropriate, then we may kind of investigate another kind of action that might be more helpful. Because what we don't want them to do is act in a way that's unethical or immoral, or in a way that would increase the likelihood of them getting fired. We don't want them to certainly do anything that's illegal, and nothing that would sabotage them reaching their desired life goals. So these are kind of checks that we would check about the behavior that they were going to act into. That's a behavioral intervention. And sometimes I know some people think that CBT and REBT, we focus on the cognitive, and we do. We do focus on the cognitive, but we also focus on behavior. Sometimes changing behavior is easier than changing the cognition. I always give an example. My wife was a professor she's a biochemist, and she taught at an engineering university, and she'd come home and say, we've been invited to a party. And I'm like, oh man, do I really want to go to a party with engineers? Because I was a little biased, I think, or prejudiced there. And I'm thinking, this is not going to be fun. This is not going to be fun at all. And so I would say to her, I think I'm going to be sick that day. And she would go, you are going to the party, okay? And being the obedient husband, I go to the party. And I'm still thinking this is going to be awful. I'm not going to like it. What a waste of time. What a boring night. And you know what? I um, I someone reached out to me and said, I've been dealing with depression, and do you have any tips? And I went, ah. And so we had this nice conversation. We got off that and we talked about, our lives in general, and other people joined in, and I had a wonderful time. What happened? I didn't change my thinking initially. I changed my behavior. I'm instead of avoiding, which is what I wanted to do, I moved toward it. And by changing the behavior, I actually changed my thinking and I changed the emotion that I had about it. So changing the thinking is quite helpful, but sometimes changing the behavior can be equally or even more powerful for some individuals. Okay. So acting a bit as if. What about a cognitive intervention? Now, here's the one that's kind of bread and butter for REBT and CBT, the second way behavioral models. And one of the techniques is cognitive restructuring. How do we go about cognitive restructuring? Well, I spend a lot of time in my course, the short-term counseling with my clients, with my students, so that they learn how to do cognitive restructuring. The process is, on paper, it sounds simple, but it does involve some work. One, when the client comes in, right, and they've had a activating event that's been challenging, and their emotional response may not be real helpful, and so we first want to identify whatever the dysfunctional beliefs are, not just belief, but beliefs. Then what we want to do is dispute those beliefs. What does that mean? We challenge those beliefs, and we'll say why in a minute. And then what we want to do is replace the dysfunctional belief that they have that was causing the problem with a more functional belief so that they better navigate their life or they're dealing with that particular issue. Okay? So that's what we do. Identify the dysfunctional beliefs, dispute those beliefs, which means challenge them, and then replace those with the more functional one. Now, look, we're not challenging the client. We're challenging the beliefs. We're not saying to the client, you need to change what kind of person you are. We're not saying that at all. We're not saying change your values. We're not saying that at all. What we're saying is we're going to challenge some beliefs that are not helping you right now so that you better attain your life goals, which is, and then we check that that's truly what they want. So there are different types of disputes. I know this slide, I don't know why it did this, but I will say we can talk about types of disputes or styles of disputes. The types of disputes are, there are many, but I want to talk about 4. There are functional or pragmatic disputes. There are empirical disputes, logical disputes, and friendship disputes. I begin with functional and pragmatic because more clients respond to that than the others. And after that, probably the empirical and friendship. And then the logical dispute is good for some clients, but not in the greater numbers that we see in terms of response to the functional and pragmatic dispute. And then there are just styles for the dispute. You could have a functional dispute that is Socratic or a functional dispute that is didactic. An empirical dispute that is Socratic or a empirical dispute that is didactic. What does that mean? So remember Socrates and his dialogue. Socrates poses questions, and those individuals would respond to his questions. So what we do in a Socratic dispute is, as therapists or counselor, we have an open-ended question about their dysfunctional belief, and then our goal here for all of the disputing is for the client to become more aware of how that dysfunctional belief is impacting them in negative ways. Okay, so that's what we're going about. we want them to experience and become aware of how those dysfunctional beliefs are getting in their way of attaining the goals that they want to attain in life. Didactic doesn't ask questions. We're kind of teaching, and we may say things like, well, some people in your situation may be thinking this. We name the dysfunctional belief. Is that what you're experiencing? Right? And then we talk about, and how does that help or not help you? So no, that's more teaching rather than asking just a question. We tend to want to start with Socratic disputing. Why? Because the client is more engaged. And the more engaged they are, the better they learn. Didactic will work. I mean, if they're not responding to the Socratic, because people just learn this stuff in different ways, right? And some people don't respond real well to Socratic questioning. And they like the didactic and more teaching method. So we try that. But initially, we don't know which style the individual will respond to. So we usually try to start with the Socratic, hoping for a lot of engagement. That doesn't happen, then we switch to didactic. Sometimes I will use both of those styles, because using both of them may solidify the dysfunctionality of their awareness of the dysfunctionality of their dysfunctional beliefs. Okay. So let's look at how we would do this. Let's say I hold the belief that I'm a total loser. I've done something or I failed at something, and I form the belief that I'm a total loser. The pragmatic or functional dispute would be if I say to them, or later on they say to themselves, how is it helping you? That would be me saying it to them. How is it helping you to tell yourself that you're a total loser? What are you getting out of that? Or they may say it to themselves. They catch themselves saying, I'm such a loser. And then they go, well, how's that helping me? How is that helping me right here, right now? Or how's this helping me reach my goal? And so they might, generally they'll just say, it's not helping me. It's really not helping me. I'll say, in fact, what do you get when you tell yourself you're a total loser? Well, I feel depressed, or I just feel, I just want to give up. I just want to get out. I want to quit, whatever, and so those would get in the way of the attainment of a goal. Empirical dispute. And by the way, initially with client, we use all of these disputes, and then we find out which ones they tend to respond to better or most. Okay. Empirical dispute is, where's the evidence, or where is it written that you fail at everything and that you're a total loser? Where's the evidence that you fail at everything? Yes, of course you fail at some things. There's a word for that. It's called a human. But where's the evidence that you fail at everything? Did you fail even getting here? No, you're at least here. And so they don't fail at everything, but they're biased towards seeing failure, and that's what they focus on. And then they overgeneralize about that. And that doesn't help them. It gives really negative outcomes. Logical, which is a little more challenging for some people, but some people just take to it. And you never know which ones are going to take to it. How does it logically follow that because you fail at some things, perhaps even several things, sometimes, that you're a total loser? How does that logically follow that because you fail at some things that you, in your essence, are a total loser? It doesn't make any sense. That's not logical. So already we've challenged them with the question, how is it helping you? It's not helping. Where's the evidence? There isn't really any evidence for it. And is it logical? No. And then there's another one. And this is really, we don't use the friendship dispute for someone who is angry. But for every other emotion, then we can use it. The friendship dispute would be, what would you say to a friend who has failed at something or some things and believes that he or she is a total loser? Right? Would you say, yeah, I've been meaning to tell you, you're such a loser. I'm not sure I could have a friend like you. Maybe you should just give up on life. Why? And then they go, no, of course I wouldn't say that. I'm like, why not? Well, that wouldn't be uplifting. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't be true. And I went, so why are you doing that to yourself? You see what I mean? You're not getting anything out of it. You wouldn't treat a friend that way. Wouldn't what would it be like if you treated yourself as a friend and not put yourself down globally, like saying that you're a total loser? See what I mean? And so we would try all of these. And let's say we find out that the person really responded well to the pragmatic functional dispute and the friendship dispute, that they didn't quite get what the logical dispute was about and the empirical just didn't click for them. Okay, then moving forward, we'll use the pragmatic and the friendship dispute. But initially, we need to try all of those to just get a feel for that. Okay, so this is one of the steps for cognitive restructuring. Again, what's the goal of this? Oh, by the way, we're going to, in cognitive restructuring, we also then, after we challenge, then we help them replace it with the functional alternative belief. So instead of demandingness, then we shift them over to preferential stuff like I wish, I want, I hope, I desire. Instead of awfulizing, we would have them embrace, yeah, this is bad, but it's not 100% bad. It's not the Holocaust and that kind of thing, okay? Remember what the goal of disputing is. It's to help the client or to help yourself or the client to help themselves. Help the client understand and accept the fact that holding this dysfunctional belief is false, it's unhelpful, it's getting in the way of them reaching their desired life goals, which decreases pleasure in life, etc. And it's causing deeply painful, dysfunctional emotions. So not really helpful. So once we do this, and remember, we don't direct the dispute at them. It's always at the beliefs. And we preface this when we're working at it because some people will go, you're telling me that I'm stupid and that I just don't know how to think. No, that's not it. All of us are human. And at times, all of us get into unhelpful ways to think, but together we can move beyond that. Now, some clients will say, I just don't think that you can help me. I don't think this is going to work. And then what do? Well, I have my way and you'll probably come up with your way. What I do is I go, you may be right. Maybe I can't help you, but my experience is that if we can collaborate on some good goals, that we can increase the chance that you improve. I can't say that you'll be perfect, but we can improve perhaps your engagement with reality and do a better job and experience more enjoyment in your life. I said, if you're right, you lose. If I'm right, you win. Who do you hope is right? And they'll go, of course, I hope you're right. And I said, okay, why don't you and I not think about that this won't work for you. We put that on the back burner. We work the reason I want to put it on the back burner is if we keep thinking that, it'll get in the way. So if I start thinking he's just never going to get it, she's just never going to get it, she's not going to improve, that's not going to help me work with you. If you think that, you will be sabotaging it from your side because you may not be all in. So my goal is to be all in to help you as much as I can. And I hope you're going to give it some energy too, so that together we can maximize the possibility of some great gains for you. And so I said, we'll put it on the back burner. And then if you want to make a decision, yeah, this doesn't work, then we can look at what we do there. Referral, or we change our strategy about what we're doing to help each other. Okay. So do that. Let's look at this next one. So again, I want to just say it. We're replacing dysfunctional beliefs. The whole point of cognitive restructuring is identifying the dysfunctional beliefs and knowing the functional alternative beliefs and replacing the dysfunctional with the functional. So instead of the demandingness, we'll go with the preference. Instead of the awfulizing, we're going to accept the badness without exaggerating it up, And so all of the functional beliefs are all about acceptance of the self, others, life, and world. Accepting. Maybe not liking everything. I don't like everything, every aspect of my life. but I accept that this is what my life is right now, because once I accept it, I can begin to work on it. But if I go, it's utterly no good, and I globally rate it, I'm not going to be real efficient. Okay. So you can see here, instead of frustration and tolerance, I accept that it is frustrating. I accept the frustration, but I also realize it's not unbearable. I'm not going to collapse on the ground, and you're not going to have to dial 911, and no one's going to have to do heart-lung resuscitation on me, right? I'm accepting this. I don't like it. But I can do something about it. And then same thing with global negative rating. Unconditional acceptance of self, others, life, and the world. Not like every aspect, but accept it. Why? Because if we accept it, we're more resilient to take it on rather than crushing ourselves and have us act in dysfunctional ways. So, addressing meaning in life. Now, this one's a little hard to read, but what I'm saying in this one is that in REBT, as we've already seen, inferences are those cognitions, those thoughts that attribute meaning to a situation or event. Okay? But they're talking about specific situations and specific events that are, and remember, we wanted to get them as concrete as possible. But we could also do the same thing about the attribution of meaning to life itself. Now, life is abstract. It's not real concrete. It's an abstract entity, but a very, very important one. And people bring those into therapy. So we can assess the meaning that they give to life, right? If they say life is a vale of tears, here's what we do in terms of assessing that. If we see that attribution of lack of meaning in their life, and it's present in every domain of their life, in their personal life, in their interpersonal life, in their educational sphere, in their work sphere, in their recreational sphere, and even in their spiritual sphere, then we go, okay, this is a bigger issue. The more pervasive the attribution of a lack of meaning to life. So what we do is then help look at the beliefs that they have, the demandingness, the awfulizing, etc., and then we just challenge those. I just wanted to let you know, I'm actually doing research on this. By the way, before I look at that, there are two individuals who I really like the work that they're doing. Joel Voss has written a book called Meaning in Life. And he's also lectured on the use of REBT to help address meaning in life. And it's a beautiful, beautiful lecture. And I don't know if you can get your hands on that, but at least the book, The Meaning of Life, has just gives you ways to assess meaning in life. And it's wonderful, wonderful book. Also, Maddie Amelie, who there in Spain, is doing the same thing with integration of REBT and logotherapy. Viktor Frankl's, the model that Viktor Frankl came up with. And he was certainly within the Holocaust situation dealing with the meaning in life and dealing with that. So Maddie's work is exceptional. And so if you look at her work, online, and the books that she's written, they are really, really fantastic. And she's just a wonderful person. Both of those individuals are wonderful, wonderful people and researchers, and I really enjoy that. My current research is looking at the memory that individual has about their life and the story that they tell about their life. And I'm looking at how I can identify the presence of pervasive threat across domains in their life. And because what we know is the perception of pervasive threat is seen in a lot of different conditions, such as PTSD and generalized anxiety disorder and eating disorders and so many major depressive disorder and even addictive disorders. It's not uncommon. So I wanted to measure. We didn't have a very clear measure on that. So that's what I'm working on. We're in the middle of the research now, and I'm very, very excited about it. As soon as that research is done, I will get on and do a video so you can find out where we are on that. So I want to thank you so much for taking a time off on, a day where you may have wanted to just rest or whatsoever, but get on and you know listen to a webinar. I do appreciate the time, your value, taking time out of your valuable time to do that. If you have any kinds of ideas that you would like for me to cover in a webinar, feel free to do that. I just want to thank all of you. By the way, if you know a friend or a colleague that might benefit from watching this, it will be available, shortly after I end this live streaming, and it will be on my YouTube channel. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day and wonderful future. Bye-bye.